Hi everyone, welcome to today's blog and to a new chapter in all that we're going to look at with regard to the parables of Jesus and his message of the kingdom. Today we're going to move on to looking at how he uses everyday items that were around him in his day to communicate some of these great visions and hopes that he wants to share with not only the people of his day but people around us today and to ourselves. And we're going to begin with perhaps some of the most well-known of those items. It's recorded in Matthew, Mark and Luke. And although these items are not so well known and used today, they still get handed down from generation to generation in popular culture. I'm going to read this version from Matthew's Gospel. From Matthew chapter 9, it says, "No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins, for if they do, the skins will burst and the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are then preserved." Now, if you were listening to that carefully, you might have said, well, they seem almost like opposites, and they are, because the idea of the patch is that in olden days they didn't have modern garments and textiles like they do today. What they did was they had somebody called a fuller, F-U-L-L-E-R, whose job it was to bash the cloth and fabric so that it began to shrink, and that was accelerated by using urine of all things, which they pour on the cloth and then allow the sun to bake it, and together with the bashing of the fabric itself, it would shrink the cloth and actually make it much more resistant to water and actually able to cope with many of the different applications that it needed. An unshrunk piece of cloth, of course, hadn't been through that process. So taking that example first of all, there's something about the new needs to fit into the old, and if you're someone who would say, well, by nature you're a sort of a traditionalist, that's sort of good news, because the idea of any new idea, any new initiative needs to fit in with the existing culture. And it shows that Jesus's message was a fulfillment of the Old Testament, not actually a whole new radical religion and new way of being. The God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament, and vice versa. One is the fulfillment of the other. By contrast, of course, then you've got this other image, which is of a new wineskin being needed to be filled with new wine. In other words, an old wineskin that has no flexibility in it, no desire to expand and grow, actually then will burst if something new comes along, something that's innovative and actually takes you and I into a new place. And Jesus says you need to be a new wineskin in order to understand who he is. So you've got this sort of paradox, but actually it's sort of how life is with Jesus. And what's interesting is in Matthew's Gospel, this comes alongside Matthew's own calling by Jesus. And if we look at his life, he was known as a tax collector, with all its associated labels of negativity, both from others and within him, perhaps himself. Any of you who've seen the TV program The Chosen will know how Matthew sees himself as well as how others see him. And yet Jesus calls him also into whom he can become. And we're called beyond our own labels into who we can become. And we're known, though strangely at the same time, by name, which we've always had since the very beginning of our life. So there's both the new, but also a letting go and embracing of the old. And so it is with creation all around us. The seasons are constantly changing, and indeed they're always creating something new out of that which was before. And so it is with God's kingdom. And the point is, then, tradition is not static, as though there was some golden point in the past. It's always being regenerated. In fact, tradition is dynamic. It's always being renewed. And this is true within our own spiritual lives as well. It may be that we've gone through a journey in the past where we chose to give our life to Jesus, to God, and we look back on those days as wonderful times, or whatever, that whether it be many years ago or recently. And but the point then is that for so many Christians we sort of stop, and we think, well, then we've achieved it by being baptized or being confirmed or whatever, or making a personal testimony of faith to God. But actually that's meant to be something that is happening every day. Every day we're meant to be both fitting in the new into the old, but also allowing ourselves to be renewed and be transformed, not just looking back to a golden age of the past, but actually also looking forward to a golden age of the future, because this is God's nature, Jesus' message of the kingdom. And as we emerge, hopefully one day, from this lockdown, can we see that in the work and the life that God has before us? And of course we'll have different approaches to that. Some will look back, some will look forward. But as a church, and indeed as a community and a nation, may we also trust the process